Hello, role-playing tubers, and welcome back to Let's Play, or at least start playing, Pathfinder Kingmaker. That's the name of the game. There it is. So, let's see. For this episode, episode 1 in the series, I'm going to be spending some time talking about the game, going over some of the settings, and making a character. If you're looking for actual gameplay, it'll probably be reserved for episode 2, because I expect it will take some time to get through this intro. Now, for the game itself, this is a alpha, so keep in mind everything here is subject to change as we get closer to the game's release. I'm actually in the closed alpha for this. I was approached by one of the publicists for the game and offered a chance to join and share some footage with you guys, so I thought that'd be cool. I'd give it a try. So anyway, Pathfinder Kingmaker, like I said, closed alpha. I think it's alpha 2 technically, if you're finding this video later in time. We've got sort of a limited set of what the final game will be like, and I'll talk more about that as we get further, as we explore the character generation and some of the options. And if you've never heard of this game, it's, from what I can tell, Pathfinder-based rule sets. So if you're familiar with either tabletop Pathfinder or Dungeons & Dragons, I think kind of like 3.5, 3rd edition kind of rule set for the most part. That should be pretty familiar for you guys. And it's designed to be an isometric, sort of top-down, mostly, role-playing game. So if you're familiar with Baldurs Gate, Icewind Dale, Neverwinter Nights, stuff like that, it's based on that kind of title. So I'm really looking forward to it. I had a lot of fun with those games in the past, and this one's I'm starting to get some hype over it anyway. So just to give you a quick view of some of the options that are currently in the game, there's a variety of challenge or difficulty settings. I'll be just playing on adapted for the purposes of these videos. Again, this can't be a full playthrough. The game's not finished yet anyway, and I don't know how far we'll make it exactly, but I'll be playing on adapted, which looks to be relatively easy. Enemies can't even critical you. There's sort of like some permadeath mechanics on core and advanced, so I'll be playing with it on relatively easy, so you've got like a last chance revive before, last chance restore before you actually die. In the core rules, you die a lot easier, and it's, you know, if you're familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, Raise Dead is generally like a 5th level cleric spell. You're not going to know it early on in the game, and you'll probably have to pay quite a lot to have a temple heal you. There's also Simplified, which is like super easy by the looks of it. Probably a good idea if you're not familiar with these sorts of games at all. Adapted is probably a nice starting point. Core is probably fair once you sort of know you kind of got the idea how to play. And then Advanced looks to be your standard hard mode. Like Core looks to be the same as tabletop. Full seems to be like actually would make the enemies even harder. So it's like challenge, sort of like a challenge campaign, which is cool. I'm happy to see all that. There's some options here. I'm not going to spend too much time looking at all of them, but you know, there's a few choices. I'm sure as the game gets closer to final release, these things will be tweaked and there'll be a few more options here and there. Unfortunately, I noticed there was no borderless full screen, or what do they call it? Windowed borderless mode. So I couldn't, it's difficult to use full screen and capture the game in my recording software. I think the game blacks out my second monitor in full screen mode. So I had to play it in windowed mode and there's no borderless option. So, you know, it is what it is. I'm assuming they'll go through some more beta test, or I guess we're into alpha testing. We're not even at beta testing yet, but, you know, stuff like that can change. But it does have your standard set of video graphic settings, so, I mean, it's all pretty normal. I left it at, well, you can see right here, it's all at high, so I'm assuming it'll look pretty. And, you know, a couple sound options, no big deal. Controls, I haven't really got into this too much. It looks very familiar to playing, like Baldurs Gate and Neverwinter Nights to me, as far as general controls. So that's all for the options. What I really want to spend some time on today, for this first video, is going through what's available in the character creation. Now, I was told that this is really their first iteration of the character generation system. So there's not a lot of the graphical customization allowed yet. There's just 3 portraits for now. And we're gonna, well, I don't want to spoil it, but essentially we're gonna be going with a mage. So, you know, we'll talk about that. I'll use that portrait for now, but from what I hear, there'll be a lot more of this later on. if you're interested in designing your own character, I'm sure there will be options as we get there. Now, we still get to go through the normal stat distribution stuff, so just hold on a sec. Okay, so we've got, also, of course, you can tell it's in the alpha. First, you have to pick your class. No big deal, right? Now, I was quite impressed that even for the alpha, there's quite a good selection of classes here. Most of these should look pretty familiar. If you're really new to the series, I'd probably recommend going with just a pure fighter or something. It's probably easier to get into these sorts of games if you've never played it at all. But I'll be going with something a little bit more advanced, just on principle, and I'll explain that when we get there. It'll make sense. But as far as I'm aware as well, this alpha only goes up to level 10, although the full game will go up to level 20 in theory, I guess. So that's cool. It reminds me a lot of the Neverwinter Nights 2 game, basically. So I guess I'll hover over some of these things so you can get an idea. Fighters get bonus combat feats every sort of even level, and then basically every character gets a feat every odd level is the way this thing looks. So if I click someone else, they won't get those bonus feats. So fighters get tons and tons of feats, which are like stuff like proficiency with their weapons and extra hit points. And we'll show you feats in a bit, but lots of cool stuff from that. I think all classes get favored class bonus hit points when you level up your main class. I'm not sure how multi-classing works just yet. I assume it'll be similar to how Neverwinter Nights 2 did it. And then, like, for instance, the fighter's got some custom skills that he learns at higher levels. You guys can read about those if you'd like. I'm assuming this is, like, if you're really familiar with the Pathfinder system, this is all pretty much straight out of the book. So, you know, you can see all those things there. I'm pretty happy with the looks of it, though. The fact that you can get really high level damage reduction, like, that's super powerful. I mean, you are, like, max level at that point, but those kinds of things can be really cool. So just a quick overview of some of the classes. Again, like, I already sort of know what I'm going to go with, but I figured I'd show you guys some of the options here. Alchemists look probably complicated, but interesting. Each one of these as well sometimes has different options after you select them. So this page is sort of your attribute page. Oh, skills, right? Like, you get skill points and ability points. Some classes have a secondary choice before you get there. I need one that actually works for that. Sorcerer, I think? Yeah, so Sorcerers have, like, a bloodline. I think there's a couple classes that have something like that. Maybe not as many as I originally thought. No, yeah, Clerics get a domain. You get to choose... Like, I'm assuming, you know, you're probably relatively familiar with these sorts of things if you know Pathfinder. If you're not, just trust me when I say there's an awful lot of stuff like this worked into the game. And, I think even Wizards, they have the standard sort of, yeah, school. You get your specialization school, and then your opposition school is the name of it. So you get to pick all those things just like if you're playing the tabletop rule set. And I'm assuming that if it's missing some of that, I wouldn't be surprised if it'll be sort of fleshed out by the final release. Because again, we are definitely in alpha. So a lot of the... I mean, I'm impressed by how much is in here already, honestly. So anyway, like I said, there's a lot of classes. I think these two below Wizard, the Arcane Trickster and the Stalwart Defender, are what's probably called advanced classes. And you probably need a certain level in other classes to unlock them. So Arcane Trickster is... I mean, I'm probably showing my age, but I forget exactly. But I think it's a certain level of rogue levels. Plus maybe a certain level of wizard levels. I forget what the exact requirements are. That's the sort of thing that... maybe there'll be a mouse over for later on, or some explanation. And then the Stalwart Defender is probably either Fighter or Paladin plus... Seems like that's the kind of thing that might have had like a dwarf racial requirement or something. But again, I don't remember exactly. I'm sure there's people in the comments that are like, oh, Blue, you're so dumb. You should know all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, point is. Anyway, there's things like the Monks who are your unarmed specialists. Monks were always one of my favorites in the early second and third... I guess it's third edition Dungeons & Dragons specifically that I thought Monks were really cool in. And it's because they get all these really cool special abilities. Like all kinds of crazy stuff here. Essentially, they get like Diamond Body at some point. Generally. They might be one of these ones that doesn't have a description yet. But you need like magical weapons to even damage them, basically. And... I don't know. They got really cool abilities. They're often kind of weak early on though, so as your main character, it could be difficult. I'm going to go with a character that's actually fairly weak early on as well, but I'm going with a sorcerer for a reason that will make sense soon. And I have no idea, like balance wise, what a good class is or what a good build is. So we're just going to wing it for the most part. So sorcerers get wizards are your classic sort of spellcasters that memorize spells and cast them, and they need to rest to regain their spells. Sorcerers have less learned spells, so you learn far fewer spells than a wizard, but you can cast. You don't have to specifically memorize one. Once you've got a good pool of spells, you can kind of cast whichever combination of them you'd like over the course of a day. You still need to rest to reset it, but they have more flexibility in spell casting, but less flexibility in memorization of spells, essentially, like learning total number of spells. And I've always kind of been a fan of sorcerers. So there's less overall sort of interesting stuff in the leveling up system here compared to a lot of other classes. Specifically the more fightery type classes that have all kinds of cool stuff. And again, of course, clerics are your divine casters that have more support magic for the most part, and then wizards and sorcerers are the more offensive casters. As a general rule, it's not quite that straightforward. There's also some really interesting mixed classes. I thought Maguses looked really interesting. Let me get a basic overview of the class. But yeah, these guys get like, it looks like they're kind of like spell blades. So they get like magically enchanted weapons, which look really, really cool. So like I'm pretty interested in Magus, and I'm not sure about Inquisitors, what they're exactly on about. Some of these classes I'm not terribly familiar with. You probably recognize stuff like Druids and Clerics. Bards get probably a lot of support as usual. You can kind of see some of these basic skills here. Let's see, Barbarians tend to be super offensive focused. Almost always. Yeah, they get kind of berserking rage abilities as you'd expect. Alchemist, again, I don't know a whole lot about this class. Poison resistance, I suppose, makes sense. They get a lot of different bombs, from what I remember looking at here. So they get, more powerful alchemical abilities, which is cool. Paladins are pretty classical, another standard primary class. Generally very anti-evil with a bit of cleric spells and all that. Pretty cool. Rogues are generally quite useful for dungeoning because you need them to detect traps and disarm traps. It's hard to make a party without one rogue in these sorts of games, generally. They get also... Oh yeah, that's cool. They used to be called backstabs, but nowadays they're called sneak attacks, which gives you bonus damage on attacks of opportunity, essentially, whatever you're going to call them. So, it's pretty standard fare, but I think it's cool. So, with Sorcerers, you get to pick a bloodline, and the reason I decided to go with Sorcerer was because they've got all these cool draconic bloodlines. And they also, of course, have a couple others that are not draconic. There's an undead bloodline and an abyssal bloodline, and those sound cool too. But because you can have a blue dragon, and I mean, it is kind of my name, I felt sort of obligated to give a try of a blue dragon sorcerer, essentially. And what that's going to give me exactly, I don't know. Blue dragons generally have kind of lightning-themed powers and breath. Although they're also kind of one of the evil dragons, perhaps. So maybe we're not going to be a totally good character. But we'll see what happens. I don't really know exactly what we get. I would expect some sort of mini lightning breath at some point. Maybe some lightning spells that are charged up somehow. Yeah, I mean, sounds cool. So let's pick some skills and attributes and stuff, and then we'll look at some spells we can learn early on. So like I said, we don't get a lot of choices for our visual appearance right now, and I don't think there's a specific racial system at the moment. All you can really do is pick a race. Basically, you pick an attribute to give a stat bonus to, or an attribute bonus. And for now, that's fine, but I'm assuming once the game's finished, there'll be more of your standard pick your race, pick your class kind of stuff. I think, anyway. I could be wrong. Now, I have no idea how to build a really good sorcerer in Pathfinder. I'm going to put a lot of points into charisma, because for sorcerers, this is their primary spellcasting stat. Intelligence is for, like, wizards. Wisdom is for clerics. And then dexterity, strength, and con are for, well, most of your combat stats. So I think I've got enough spare ability points to get to 12 and everything, basically. or most of everything. Put a couple into intelligence as well. So I'm not particularly wise. Now, you can refund a couple points by going negative, but that will decrease some of your saving throws, or other, well, for wisdom, a lot of saving throws. I'm just going to put my racial modifier into charisma and have a mighty score of 20, which is kind of ridiculous, which gives me a +5 modifier for charisma checks. I feel like this would make a pretty good leader, because I'll get an awful lot of bonuses for conversation. Plus, it's my primary stat for spellcasting, so pretty good. And then I'm still, at the very least, slightly above average in other stats. I'm not sure if strength is worth it. I probably won't be doing much physical attacking, although I believe this does apply to certain skill checks. Let's see. Well, there's strength checks we're not going to be doing. Maybe putting the points in strength isn't really worth it. But wisdom might be better. Like, so, 12 and everything. So I get at least a +1 for wisdom checks, int checks, con checks. Constitution gives me a little bit more HP. If I could make it to 14 points, it'd actually give me +2 HP per level. But there's some scaling involved. So getting to 14 points would cost 2. Now, I could do that. Take a penalty to strength. And now I've got an extra +2 HP per level up, which is pretty good, actually. But now I've lost my dex bonus, which gives me armor class. And a lot of, there's a lot of skill, a lot of checks that you can use to dodge reflex saving throws. Like, that's a pretty valuable one, too. Although Constitution gives you a similar, what's it called? It's in there something, Fortitude. So you've got reflex saving throws, fortitude saving throws, I think it's probably more balanced to go like this, but again, I don't know a good build, so I'm just going to go with this for now. And then you got skill points. You get 1 by default, and it's a +4 in one of these skills. And then for every +1 to your int score, your modifier, you get another skill point. And I think it's every level up is like that. So if you had a lot of intelligence, essentially, you could get quite a lot of skills. So if you're a traditional wizard, you probably get a lot of skills. Now, magic device is charisma specifically, so there you go. And the other one for charisma is persuasion. So I figure, as my leader of the party, I will be good at persuading enemy characters, enemies and friends, and using magic devices. I figure that's kind of cool. The other ones are more, like, that's rogue-based for the most part. Rogue-based for the most part. Athletics could be probably one of your fighters. Perception is wisdom, maybe one of your clerics. I think the lore are all intelligence-based, so more around wizards and whoever else uses int. Probably alchemists and stuff. And then mobility is probably dex-based, yeah. So, anyway, that's pretty standard, right? No big deal. Then we get to look at the perks. So, there's a lot of perks here, and we only get to pick 2 of them. I'd love to spend a lot of time going over this, and if you're a fighter, you get an awful lot of feats. Feats is the proper name, I suppose. As a non-fighter, we just get 1 every odd level. So, well, we get 2 to start, and then 1 every odd level. So we don't get too many of them, and some of them might turn out to be really good. For instance, later on, Elemental Focus Electricity might be very, very valuable if we get some cool blue dragon effects that this can apply to. There's an elemental focus for most types of elements, and if you use primarily fire or electricity spells, those seem like they might be good. I think we're going to pick at the top here. I'll just mouse over most of these so you can pause if you really want to look. Combat casting. Basically, if your concentration check fails, your spell fizzles, or whatever they call it in this terminology. So it's often a really, really good perk, especially early game, so that you can actually get your magic to cast. And to be honest, light armor might not be a bad idea. I'm not sure what the casting requirements are around sorcerer magic, but it's possible we can't wear armor at all to cast, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. Alertness is for perception checks. Let's see. Great Fortitude gives you fortitude saving throws. Some of these are less impressive in my opinion. Also, if you pick one, oftentimes you unlock another one. So, like, for instance, if we did pick Elemental Affinity Lightning, it would unlock, if I wanted to, in G, greater elemental force. So I assume there's probably quite a few, sort of upgrades to feats if you work at it like that. So anyway, there's initiative for your turn order in combat, improved unarmed strike that monks get like automatically, basically. That's for will saving throws, reflex saving throws, standard sort of fighter perks. Now, the meta magic stuff is cool. It's probably not something we want to start with because they add levels to the spells you're casting. But some of these are really, really neat later on. Empowers... what does it say here? Well, you can read it there, but... all numeric variables are increased by half. I'm not sure exactly how the math works out, but it increases the spell level by 2, and they probably deal more damage, like it says. Extend is for duration type spells. Heighten is for... Oh, for the purpose of... There's some spells, like there's a lot of defensive abilities that mean like immune to level 4th and lower spells. This would probably bypass stuff like that. So you could heighten a fireball to level 5 instead of level 3, and that would get around the Globe of Invulnerability or something, I think. Again, I could be wrong. Maximize... See, that's a really powerful one as well. So when you're rolling large dice, like, say, a D8 or a D10, this will give you the max roll on all of them, I think. Which is kind of insane, actually. Like, instead of doing an average of 4 or 5 damage per dice times, 6 dice, you're just going to roll the maximum every time. But it does make the spell level go way up. Those can be pretty cool. Quicken makes your spell cast quicker. Again, very, very useful. You can pump out more spells quicker, but they're much higher level. Reach is for the range of the spell. Some spells need touch range, close range, long range. This just gives them longer ranges. So those are all like pretty neat. Point blank is for ranged weapons. Rapid shot is for ranged weapons. Well, that's neat. It's like a little buff. I don't know if some of these I've never seen before, of course. You can just buff each other for saving throws. That's cool. Shield bonuses. Various things. Lots of armor class available from shield focus. That's cool. If you're trying to make sort of a tanky fighter, that'd be pretty useful. Well, that's cool. So you could have 2 shield proficient users, put them side by side with shield wall, and you get even more ridiculous amounts of armor class. That's nice little synergy there, really, honestly. That's cool. So then you can get skill focuses for all your skills. That's pretty standard stuff. It's +3 to your skill checks with that skill check. To that skill specifically. So, that's fine. And if you're really high, it's +6 instead of +3. So another pretty good one late game. Like, once you're at the point where your skills are level 10, 1 perk, and suddenly you get a +6 out of it, which is pretty good. Probably the kind of thing your thieves or your rogues might want to look into for some of your stealth checks. So anyway, that's cool. Then there's the spell focus for each school, +1 to the difficulty check. And again, just like the elemental focus, there's a greater spell focus after you've leveled it up a little bit. Spell penetration, I'm not sure how useful this would be early on, but some enemies have like innate magic resistance. This would sort of help get around it. More skill checks for acrobatics and stuff. Sort of a standard monk feat. And we're almost at the bottom here. Throwing anything could be interesting. I'm not sure how much random stuff you have to throw. It looks like it might be focused on like alchemy, so you can throw bombs and other potions perhaps. But again, I'm not super familiar with alchemists. Weapon finesse generally changes your strength modifier into a dexterity modifier. So if you're going with an agile fighter, this is required. Then there's a weapon focus for pretty much every weapon, and they've got a lot of weapons here, which is really cool. I hope that the game has a lot of options where they give you +1, +2, +3 type rapiers and scimitars. Often in Dungeons & Dragons style games, there's a lot of +1 longswords. And if you don't specialize in longswords or bastard swords, you never find any magical weapons of those types. Now, after, the Baldurs Gate Icewind Dale series, they definitely, I feel like in general these games have done a good job of spreading out the magic weapons. So I'm probably not too worried about that in a modern game, but hopefully this Pathfinder Kingmaker has done a good job of actually spreading out the magic weapons anyway. Otherwise, some of these cool-looking exotic ones aren't really that cool if you can never find one. I mean, weapon-focused tentacle. I sure hope you can find some tentacles, or else that's not going to help. I mean, maybe that's for magic attacks, actually. If you have some sort of tentacle like, maybe there's like a warlock class of some sort that uses it. Anyway, pretty cool stuff, right? I'm going to pick, because I plan on being a bit of a nuker regardless, like offensive casting, I'm going to pick spell focus evocation here, because we'll definitely have evocation tiered spells for doing damage. And I'll probably try to pick an element later on, and maybe another spell focus later on as well. So those are our perks. Now we get to pick some spells. So you always get, I think, all of the cantrips. They're level 0. They tend not to be terribly impressive, though. I'm not sure how many per day we can cast, but you start with all of them, and it gives you a good variety of basic things you can do. So, for instance, if we want to do a little bit of damage, we can use, like, Ray of Frost to do 1d3 cold damage. Not very much, but I think they're all kind of in that category where they can do just a little bit, and they give you one of, like, each element. There's a couple minor debuffs, like, that gives... What's that called? Clouds the mind. Oh, so they can't take no actions. So against really weak enemies with low hit die pools, that might be a pretty good cantrip, actually. It won't work very well late game, but then the other ones are more anti-undead, cause fatigue kind of thing. Flare, I think, is dazzle, yeah. So there's lots of little minor things there, nothing to stress out about too much. The more interesting stuff happens once you're picking spells. So, unfortunately, we can only pick 2 level 1 spells for now, although as we get level ups, we can pick more. Now, if you're a wizard or a different type of caster, not a... whatever the name is, the type of caster that casts times per day rather than slots per day, you would have more spell choices. But we get to cast whichever 2 spells we take, we can cast quite a few times. So you can see here, there's a pretty good spell selection for this alpha build. I would feel remiss if I didn't take Magic Missile. It's one of your standard basic damage dealers. It gets better slowly over time. Every 2 levels you get an extra missile of 1d4 plus 1. But there's like basically no saving throw or damage reduction. It's really difficult for enemies to not be damaged by it. And it does scale with your levels, so it tends to be good. Plus it's medium range, which is much better than touch range. Now, if someone has shield as an alternative, they can actually negate magic missiles pretty easily, but you don't fight a ton of spellcasters early on in my experience, generally. Now, there's like a ton of spells here, and again, I could go over them all if you really wanted, but it would take a while. Burning Hands tends to be one of the better ones, in my opinion. It's a small AoE, and there's not a lot of level 1 area of effect type spells. Plus it does scale again, 1d4 per level up to 5. So it's got scaling, it's got area of effect. You can save against it, but you only take half damage from the save, so it's not that impressive. There's probably other more utility spells that, especially if you're bringing a wizard, might be worthwhile. Mage Armor is an old classic as well. That's a pretty big boost to armor early on, so that'll help keep you alive. Might be worth starting with Magic Missile and Mage Armor just to make it easier, but I don't know for sure. Shocking Grasp, I was hoping to go kind of lightning focused, but there aren't any really good level 1 lightning spells in my opinion. Because this requires touch range, which means you have to be adjacent to an enemy, and you have to pass an attack. Essentially you have to, it's like their armor class or their dodge, they have a chance to avoid damage based on your attack rating basically. So that's no fun. Snowballs and stuff are pretty cool. It's a lot like, well, to be honest, it seems a lot better than Shocking Grasp, because it's a close range rather than touch range, so it's a little bit easier to pull off. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff here. Lots of different builds for different types of casters. Anyway, like I said, I think I'm just going to go with sort of my tried and true... Maybe I will pick up Mage Armor right off the bat, because it doesn't scale. So at level 1, well, it scales duration, but 1 hour is still pretty good. So if I'm going to get into a tough combat, I could cast that to keep myself alive a little bit better, protecting from arrows, although not as specifically focused on arrows. But just it'll help against everything. And then I've got one spell to do some damage. And then maybe when I level up, I'll pick up Burning Hands, because it's definitely good, and it gets better as you get to level 2, 3, 4, 5. So anyway, there you go. Enough messing around, right? And then, of course, you get to pick your name. And we'll be going with my standard fare for that. And an alignment, as usual. So, like I said, because I'm not going to go straight on evil. But I might pick, like, a not really truly good character. I've always kind of been a fan of the chaotic good archetype. And I have a feeling our role-playing explanation for that is that the blue dragon blood in us it would never allow us to be fully lawfully good, is my opinion. So we're still going to be a good guy, because I like playing as someone who's like, the reason we're saving the world or whatever is because we're a good guy. If you're an evil guy, that makes it a lot harder to understand. But the chaoticness means we're less, we care more about ourselves than following the law. Anyway, standard kind of wheel of alignment, which is fun. There may be some issues with making a party with opposite alignments. You can also go true neutral if you're really boring. But, I don't know what'll happen. We'll find out in a little bit. And that's pretty much it for, I think, the intro episode here. Because we're already at 30 minutes just going over the character creation stuff. Like I said before, because it's an alpha, there'll be lots more of this as the game gets closer to completion. And I'm looking forward to it. I think this is already really solid, and there's a ton of options as far as classes and perks, for, feats and skills and spells and stuff already, so that's really impressive. Anyway, I'll see you next time. It's for us to start the actual game, and I'll continue to explain a little bit more about what I know about this game as we get there. So thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you're excited to follow along with this. I don't know if I want to call this like a let's look at or a let's try, but it's a let's play, but, it's not a full, complete one. There's no way I can finish the game for this one. So we're just going to be experimenting with the alpha for a little while. All right, folks. See you guys next time.